She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume. Warm, expensive, nothing like the boardroom version of her I had always kept a careful distance from. And then she said it, right there in the middle of 300 people, in a voice so low only I could hear it. "Take me home, or you're fired." I remember the exact moment my brain stopped working. I remember the way the Christmas lights blurred above her head like a crown of scattered gold. I remember thinking, this woman has gone absolutely insane. I was nobody. I want you to understand that. I was the guy who made sure the conference room chairs were lined up right, the guy who coordinated the van schedule for airport pickups, the guy who ate his lunch alone at his desk so he could leave exactly at 5:15 to pick up his 7-year-old daughter from the school bus. I was a ghost with a lanyard, and somehow my CEO had just grabbed my sleeve, pulled me into the corner of the most expensive hotel ballroom in the city, and whispered something that turned my entire life upside down. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that Claire Sutton wasn't trying to humiliate me. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't having some kind of episode. She was desperate. And desperate people do things that don't make sense until you understand what they're running from. This is the story of a Christmas night I will never forget. The night a powerful woman chose me, of all people, to trust with her life. And the night I realized that sometimes the most guarded people are only guarded because they have already lost everything once before. Stay with me, because nothing about this goes where you think it's going. My name is Reed Callahan, and before I tell you about the night that changed everything, you need to know a little bit about who I was before it happened, because context matters. Where you're standing when lightning strikes matters. I grew up in a small town in central Ohio, Millbrook, population about 4,000 if you count the cows, which most people did. My dad was a mechanic. My mom worked the front desk at a dental office for 23 years. We weren't poor. We just weren't comfortable. There's a difference. Poor means you don't have enough. Not comfortable means you have just enough to know exactly how fragile enough really is. I left Millbrook at 18 on a partial scholarship to Ohio State, studied logistics and supply chain management, which sounds boring, and it is, but it pays. And somewhere in the middle of my junior year, I met Ann Whitfield at a coffee shop on High Street. She was reading a dog-eared copy of East of Eden, wearing mismatched socks, and laughing at something on her phone so hard that she nearly knocked her oat milk latte off the table. I fell in love with her in approximately 4 seconds. We got married at 25 in her parents' backyard in Columbus. Small wedding, sunflowers everywhere. Her dad cried through the entire ceremony. I pretended not to notice. And then, when we were 28, Lily came along. Lily Grace Callahan, like 7 pounds, 4 ounces, born at 3 in the morning on the coldest night in February. She had Anne's eyes, this deep, steady hazel that seemed to see everything. And she had my stubborn chin, which Anne found endlessly hilarious. For 2 years, we were the most ordinary, happy family you could imagine. And then Anne got sick. I'm not going to dwell on that part, not because it doesn't matter, it matters more than anything, but because this story isn't about grief. It's about what comes after grief, when you're still standing there holding a toddler's hand and the world just keeps moving, and you have to move with it whether you're ready or not. Anne died 3.5 years before that Christmas night. Lily was 4 years old, and I became, overnight, a single father in a city I had relocated to for Anne's job. No family within 4 hours, no close friends. Just a little girl with her mother's eyes looking up at me every morning like I had all the answers. I got a job at Sutton Capital Group, a mid-size investment and asset management firm in downtown Chicago. I was their director of operations logistics, which sounds impressive. It wasn't. I coordinated building services, managed vendor contracts, oversaw the corporate car schedule, the conference room bookings, the catering accounts. I made sure the machine ran without anyone noticing the machine. That's it. But it paid well enough. The benefits were solid, and the hours were predictable, which, when you're a single parent, is not a small thing. Predictable hours are the difference between your kid having a parent who shows up and your kid growing up wondering when dad's coming home. My daughter Lily was the center of everything. Every decision I made, every dollar I saved, every time I bit my tongue when a coworker said something obnoxious, every morning I ironed a shirt and drove into that downtown parking garage and swiped my ID badge and smiled at the security desk. All of it was for her. She liked strawberry pancakes on Saturdays. She was obsessed with horses. She slept with a stuffed elephant named Captain that she'd had since she was 2. And God help you if Captain was in the laundry on a bedtime night. She called me Daddy Reed sometimes. She'd heard another kid call their father by his full name once and thought it was extremely sophisticated. It melted me every time, and I never told her that because she would have used it as leverage. 7-year-olds are terrifyingly clever. Now, the company I worked for, Sutton Capital Group. I need to tell you about the name because, yes, the CEO's name was Sutton, Claire Sutton. Her grandfather had founded the firm. Her father had nearly run it into the ground. And Claire, at 38 years old, had walked in 12 years ago, rebuilt it from the bones up, and turned it into one of the most respected mid-market investment firms in the Midwest. That was the official story. The story I'd heard from HR during onboarding and seen on the framed profile on the wall outside the main elevator. The unofficial story, the one that floated around in the break room, was that Claire Sutton was made of granite and ambition and ice water, that she had never been seen to laugh in the office, that she worked until 9 p.m. most nights and came in before 7 most mornings, that she had fired 3 assistants in a single quarter once for reasons that were never fully explained, that she never attended happy hours, never came to birthday lunches, never made small talk by the espresso machine. I neither believed nor dismissed any of it, because I had never spoken to Claire Sutton in 3 years of working there, not once. I saw her occasionally, in the elevator, crossing the lobby, walking through the open office floor toward the executive wing with that particular stride that powerful people have, the one that says, I know exactly where I'm going, and I will not be stopping. She was always impeccably dressed, always composed, and she always looked straight ahead, like she was the only person in any room she walked into. I didn't resent her for it. I didn't particularly admire it either. She was just the top of a building I worked in, a name on a company email signature, someone I'd never have a reason to speak to. I was wrong about that last part. The annual Sutton Capital Christmas party was a big deal. Not to me personally. I'm a strawberry pancakes and pajama by 9 kind of person, and ballrooms full of people in cocktail attire while someone plays jazz standards on a rented baby grand are not exactly my natural habitat. But institutionally, it was a big deal. The company rented out the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom every December. 300 guests, staff, clients, investors, board members, open bar, a 5-course dinner, the kind of event that cost more money than I made in 4 months. As Director of Operations Logistics, the party was essentially my responsibility to coordinate from an infrastructure standpoint. Catering contracts, vendor setup, the shuttle van schedule from the company parking deck, the AV system, the gift bag assembly. All of it ran through me in the 2 weeks leading up to the event. By the time the actual night arrived, I was exhausted. I dropped Lily off at my neighbor Sandy Kowalski's house. Sandy was in her late 50s, retired, and absolutely adored Lily in the way that some people adore other people's children with a depth and generosity that you can never fully repay. Lily called her Sandy Lady. Sandy called her Little Miss Serious. They had a whole thing. I told Lily I'd be back by 11. She told me to bring her a dessert from the party. I told her I'd try. She told me that try wasn't good enough and that she expected a chocolate thing with layers. I drove to the Grand Meridian, parked in the staff area, did my final run-through, checked in with the catering coordinator, confirmed the shuttle van was running every 30 minutes, touched base with AV, made sure the registration table had everything it needed. Then, I found myself a quiet corner near the bar with a club soda and a view of the room. I wasn't really a guest. I wasn't really staff. I was somewhere in between, the person everyone calls when something goes wrong, and nobody notices when nothing does. The ballroom was beautiful, if I'm honest. The hotel had decorated it with deep green and gold, tall centerpieces with white flowers and Christmas branches, warm candlelight. That jazz pianist doing something soft and elegant in the corner. People were arriving in their holiday best. Conversations swelled and dipped like a tide. I watched it all from my corner and ate a crab puff and checked my watch. That's when I saw her. Claire Sutton was standing near the far end of the bar. Now, I'd seen her at company events before. She usually arrived, worked the room for an hour with precise efficiency, said all the right things to all the right people, and left, like clockwork. But tonight something was different. She was still, in a way that wasn't composed, in a way that was rigid, like a person trying very hard to look relaxed and failing. Her dress was burgundy, her hair was up, she had a champagne glass in her hand that she hadn't touched, and she was looking at someone across the room. I followed her gaze, and I saw him, a man in his late 50s, heavy built, silver at his temples. He was holding court with a group of guests near the entrance, laughing loudly, touching people on the shoulder, occupying space the way men like that tend to do, like the room itself is indebted to them for showing up. I recognized him vaguely. Victor Crane. He was one of the firm's largest outside investors. He held about 40% of the board's proxy votes, which I knew from the board meeting prep materials I'd coordinated logistics for. He wasn't an employee, but he was always around. I had no particular feelings about him. But Claire was watching him the way a person watches a thing they're afraid of. I filed that away, turned back to my club soda. About 40 minutes later, my radio crackled. One of the shuttle vans had a flat tire in the parking deck. I handled it, rerouted the other van, called a backup car service. By the time I circled back into the ballroom, the energy had shifted slightly. The dinner service had wrapped. People were in that loosened, floating phase of a party. Groups shifting and reforming, voices a little louder, laughter a little easier. I scanned the room out of habit. Victor Crane was now near the bar, standing next to Claire. And everything about her body language had changed. Her shoulders were turned slightly away from him. Her chin was angled down. She had that champagne glass in a grip that looked like she might shatter it. He was leaning in when he spoke to her. Close. Too close for a professional event. Found he wasn't touching her. Not that I could see. But there was something in the geometry of it. Something that made the back of my neck feel strange. I started moving toward the bar without quite deciding to. I told myself I needed a refill on my club soda. I was about 12 feet away when it happened. Victor said something. I don't know what it was. The music covered it, but Claire's head turned sharply. She stepped back, and he stepped forward. And the look on her face, I've only seen that look once before in my life. On Anne's face in a hospital parking lot when the doctor had just used the word inoperable for the first time. It was the look of someone realizing they have no good options left. I kept walking, reached the bar, stood next to her. She didn't look at me. Victor did. He gave me the kind of glance you give a potted plant that inconveniently appeared in a doorway. Then he said, smoothly, pleasantly, because men like that are always smooth and pleasant, I'll find you later, Claire. We have a lot to finish discussing. He picked up his drink, walked away, and Claire Sutton stood completely still for 5 full seconds. Then she turned to me. I don't know what I expected her to say. Probably nothing. She didn't know me. In her world, I was furniture that occasionally sent her calendar invites. But she looked at me, really looked at me, in a way that was almost startling, like someone dropped the curtain for half a second. And then she leaned in, and she said it. "Take me home, or you're fired." My brain went completely blank. The jazz pianist was playing something about silver bells. Someone laughed across the room. I stood there holding a club soda and stared at my CEO and thought approximately 700 things at once, and none of them were coherent. I started. "I'm not drunk," she said quietly, almost like she'd anticipated the assumption. "And I'm not doing what you think I'm doing." "I don't actually know what you're doing," I said. "Good," she said. "Then just," she paused, steadied herself. "Your car, wherever you parked, in the next 5 minutes, please." She walked away from the bar without looking back, and I stood there. And I made a decision that I have thought about approximately 1,000 times since. I went and told my assistant Dale Pruitt to cover the rest of the shuttle coordination, and then I went to get my car. She was waiting near the staff exit, not the main entrance, the side door on the hotel's east wing, the one that opened to a quieter stretch of street away from the valet stand and the guests smoking out front. She'd found it herself, which meant she knew this building, knew where the exits were. When I pulled up, she looked both ways down the street before she opened the door. She got in, closed the door quietly, and said nothing. I sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. "Where am I taking you?" I asked. A long pause. "Not my house," she said. "Okay." I pulled out of the lot. I didn't know where I was going. I started driving south, away from the hotel, away from downtown, into the quieter stretch of the city that runs along the lake. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap. Her shoulders were still rigid, but she kept her gaze forward. For about 3 minutes, neither of us said anything. "You're Reed," she said finally. I blinked. "Yeah. Operations. You set up the shuttle schedule. And the catering contracts and the AV and the... Yeah, operations." Another pause. "I know who you are," she said, not unkindly, more like she was confirming something she'd already decided. I didn't know what to do with that. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing unusual. The usual Chicago nighttime traffic, red lights, headlights, a cab changing lanes. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I asked. "No." "Okay," I said. "But you understand this is a strange situation. You realize that?" "I do," she said. "And you're aware that what you said back there could be interpreted in a number of ways that are..." "I know what I said." Her voice was flat. "And I know how it sounded. And I'm telling you that's not what it was." I kept driving. About 7 minutes in, I checked the mirror again. There was a black SUV, 2 cars back. It had been there since we left the hotel, 3 turns ago. My pulse kicked up slightly. I didn't say anything. I turned left onto a street I didn't need to turn onto. The SUV turned with me. "There's a car following us," I said. She didn't turn around, but I saw her jaw tighten. "Black SUV?" she said. "Yeah." "How long?" "Since the hotel?" A beat. Something passed across her face, not surprise. More like confirmation of something she already feared. "Can you lose it?" she asked. Now, I want to be clear. I am a logistics coordinator from Ohio. I am not Jason Bourne, but I did grow up driving on rural roads in winter with a father who taught me that calm and deliberate beats fast and panicked every single time. So I turned right. Then another right. Pulled into a parking structure on Michigan Avenue, drove to the 3rd level, backed into a spot in the corner, cut the lights. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing came up the ramp. I let out a breath. She let out a breath. "Okay," I said. "I'm going to need you to tell me something. Because I have a daughter at home and a job I can't afford to lose. and I'm currently sitting in a dark parking garage with my CEO after being followed from a hotel, so something, anything. She turned and looked at me, and for the first time since I'd pulled up to that side door, she looked less like a CEO and more like a person. "Do you know Victor Crane?" she asked. "The investor? Board proxy votes, shows up to quarterly meetings. He controls 40% of the board, and he's been trying to take this company from me for the last 4 months." She said it calmly, not like she was confiding, more like she was briefing. "When I say trying to take it," she continued, "I don't mean through legitimate means. I mean," she paused, pressed her lips together. "I mean through means that would not survive a federal audit." I stared at her. "He's been embezzling," she said quietly, "from the firm's pension fund, client retirement accounts, small amounts at a time, moved through shell accounts into offshore holdings. I found out 6 weeks ago." "6 weeks ago," I repeated. "Nah, and you haven't. Why haven't you gone to the—" "Because I've been building the case," she said, "with a federal financial auditor I trust, one who is not connected to anyone at the firm. I need a complete evidence trail before I hand it over. If I move too soon and Victor knows, he has lawyers who will bury every document I have." "And he knows you're investigating him," I said. "He suspects, which is why—" She glanced toward the parking structure exit. "Which is why tonight he cornered me and told me that if I didn't sign a board agreement by the 1st of the year, essentially handing him operational control of the firm, he would make sure I was removed from leadership on grounds of financial mismanagement. He'd frame you," I said. "He's already started planting the seeds." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands did. Slightly, enough that I noticed. I sat with all of that for a moment. "Okay," I said, "so tonight, at the party." "He told me he'd arranged a private car, that we were going to continue our conversation somewhere more—" She stopped, chose the next word carefully. "Somewhere more controlled." "And you needed someone nearby who wasn't connected to him," I said. "Someone I could trust not to be," she said. "Why me?" She looked at me steadily. "Because in 3 years, you have never once engaged in office gossip, never lobbied for access to people above your level, never taken a side in any political dispute at that company, never complained, never overpromised." A pause. "And because last February, no, when you found out one of the junior vendors was billing us for hours he hadn't worked, you quietly documented it and put it on my desk without saying a word to anyone. Just a note that said, 'Thought you should know.' I had forgotten about that note entirely." "You read that?" I said. "I read everything that comes to my desk," she said. We found a 24-hour diner on the south side called Patty's Blue Star. It was the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since Thursday, and a waitress named June who called everyone Han and didn't ask questions. I ordered coffee. Claire ordered tea and looked at it like she wasn't sure what to do with it. We sat in a corner booth for the better part of an hour, and in that hour, I learned more about Claire Sutton than I had learned in 3 years of working in the same building. She had taken over Sutton Capital at 26. Her father, Harlan Sutton, had nearly bankrupted the firm through a series of catastrophic decisions, over-leveraged real estate funds, a client fraud scandal he'd barely survived, a revolving door of executives who either quit or were let go in humiliation. The board had approached Claire as a last resort. She was the founder's granddaughter. She had an MBA from Wharton. She'd spent 2 years at a hedge fund in New York and produced results that people still talked about. She'd said yes, not because she owed her father anything. She'd made clear she didn't, but because her grandfather had built something, and she wasn't willing to watch it disappear. The Victor Crane had come in 18 months later as a stabilizing investor. Back then, he'd been helpful, legitimate. But money changes people, or rather, it reveals them. Over the years, as the firm grew, Victor had maneuvered quietly, accumulated proxy agreements from smaller board stakeholders, built leverage, and then he'd started moving money. "I have 214 client accounts," Claire said. She wrapped both hands around her tea mug. "Retirees, teachers, a school district's pension fund in Peoria, a union in Rockford. These are people who trusted us with their futures." She looked at the table, just for a moment. "He's taken about $4.3 million from those accounts," she said, slowly, carefully, over 22 months. $4.3 million from retirees, from teachers. I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the Chicago December outside. "What do you need to finish the case?" I asked. She looked up. "Why?" "Because you told me all of this," I said, "which means either you're going to ask me for something, or you needed to tell someone, and I happen to be the only person in range." I looked at her steadily. "Which is it?" A very long silence, and then, for the first time, something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile exactly, more like the memory of one. "Both, maybe," she said. "The last piece I need is the internal fund transfer documentation from the firm's settlement account," she said. "Victor ran his final transfers through a sub-account linked to our operational clearing system. Which means it's not in the main financial ledger. It's in the operational records." "Which is my department," I said. "Which is your department," she confirmed. I stared at my coffee cup. This was the moment. I knew it was the moment. This was the place where a reasonable, sensible, self-preserving person with a 7-year-old daughter at home said, "I'm sorry. I can't. Good luck." I thought about Lily. I thought about Anne. I thought about a school district in Peoria and a union in Rockford and 214 people who trusted someone with the thing they'd spent their lives building. "Tell me exactly what I'm looking for," I said. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life, and I have had some genuinely strange weeks, so that is not a small statement. Claire and I worked out a system. Because we couldn't meet at the office. Victor had people watching and we didn't know who. We communicated through a method that sounds slightly ridiculous in retrospect, but worked. She would send me operational update requests through the standard internal ticketing system, the kind of mundane work orders I processed 20 times a day. Embedded in the details of those tickets were instructions. I would access the records she needed through my standard administrative credentials, the same system I logged into every single day to manage vendor accounts and building contracts. And then I would leave printed copies in a specific folder inside the physical archive room on the 14th floor. The one nobody went into because everything was digital now, and the archive room smelled like old carpet and broken ambition. It was slow. It was painstaking. But slowly, a picture emerged from those records. Transaction codes that didn't match their stated purposes. Settlement account transfers with authorization signatures that, when cross-referenced with internal calendar logs, had been signed on days when the authorized signatory was out of the country. Digital fingerprints that Victor had been very careful about, but not careful enough, because he hadn't accounted for the fact that the operational records ran deeper than the financial ledger. He'd cleared his tracks from the accounting system, but operations logged everything. My coworker Dale Pruitt, who handled the shuttle coordination I'd handed off on the night of the party, asked me on Monday morning how the rest of the event had gone. He had a friendly, uncomplicated curiosity that most long-tenured employees develop, an interest in the texture of things without any real investment in the deeper current beneath them. "Fine," I told him. "Long night, you know how it is." He nodded and poured himself coffee and told me his wife had burned the Christmas cookies and they'd had to order from the bakery, and honestly, it might have been an improvement. I laughed at the right moment, and inside I was calculating document timestamps. That's the thing nobody tells you about living in two realities at once. The harder one isn't maintaining the secret. It's the ordinary conversation, the way you have to keep showing up to the small moments. The coffee chat, the birthday card in the break room, the vendor call about a catering dispute, while carrying something enormous in the room right behind your eyes. I got good at it, faster than I expected. Maybe because I'd already practiced it in a different way in the years since Anne died. The art of being present for the ordinary while the weight lived quietly beneath. Lily noticed something was different, not in a specific way. She couldn't have articulated it, but she's perceptive in the way that children who've known loss early tend to be. She reads the air around people. One night during that stretch, she was sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework while I made dinner. And she said, without looking up from her math worksheet, "Daddy Reed, are you worried about something?" I paused at the stove. "Why do you ask?" "Bug? You've been stirring that for like 11 minutes, she said. I looked down. The pasta sauce I was supposedly tending to had been stirred into a barely recognizable consistency. "Just thinking about work stuff," I said. She considered this. "Is it the kind of work stuff that gets better, or the kind that stays bad?" 7 years old. "The kind that gets better," I said. "I promise." She went back to her worksheet. "Okay, but maybe stop stirring. It looks weird now." She was right on both counts. During those 2 weeks, Claire and I spoke directly only 3 times. Once in the parking structure elevator. She got on, I was already there. We had 45 seconds, and she told me what she needed next in a voice so calm it could have been about catering invoices. Once in the lobby, where she walked past me and dropped a small folded note into the folder I was carrying as casually as if she were brushing a piece of lint from her sleeve. And once, and this one I keep coming back to, on a Wednesday evening, just after 7 p.m., I was the last person on my floor. I was doing a final pass to make sure the conference rooms were reset for the next day, just something I did out of habit, didn't need to, but old patterns die hard. I turned a corner and nearly walked into her. She was standing at the window at the end of the hall, just standing there, looking out at the city. "Sorry," I said. "Didn't know anyone was still—" "It's all right," she said. She didn't move. She kept looking out the window. I should have kept walking. I didn't. I stood there for a moment. "You okay?" I asked. A pause. That's a very broad question. I know. That's why I asked it instead of a specific one. She tilted her head slightly, almost amused. "I don't sleep much," she said. "I come up here sometimes when the building is quiet and She stopped. "It's nothing. It's not relevant." "You don't have to make everything relevant to be allowed to say it," I said. She looked at me then. "My grandfather used to stand at this window," she said. "Before I was even born. He told me about it once. He said he used to look out at the city and think about all the people who trusted him with their money. He called it holding someone's future, like a weight. He said it should always feel heavy." "Does it?" I asked. "Every single day," she said. As we stood there for a moment in the quiet of the empty office floor with the city glittering 22 stories below. And I thought, this is not who I thought she was. I found out in those small, fractured conversations pieces of her life. She had been engaged once, 6 years ago, to someone in finance who told her when she chose the firm over a compromise that would have required her to step back that she was too much, that she needed to be someone's partner, not someone's competition. She had not dated since. She had a sister in Portland she spoke to every Sunday. A small apartment near Lincoln Park that she'd furnished in about 2 days after moving in and hadn't changed since. A coffee maker she'd had for 9 years that she refused to replace because it still worked. I didn't share much about myself, but she asked, and once, carefully, about the photo on my desk. The one of Lily in her Halloween costume, dressed as a horse with a level of commitment to the bit that other 7-year-olds could only aspire to. I told her about Lily, about Anne. She listened the way some people listen, like she was setting everything else aside to make room for it. "She sounds incredible," Claire said quietly, about Lily. "She really is," I said. "She tells me daily that she's smarter than me, and honestly, she's not wrong. And Claire laughed, a real one, soft and brief and completely unguarded. And then she seemed almost startled by it, like she'd forgotten that sound came from her. I was not falling in love with my CEO. I want to be very clear about that. I was absolutely falling in love with my CEO, but I kept that to myself and kept it in a small, sealed room inside my chest and told it firmly to stay there. Because she was my boss. Because I had a daughter. Because the situation was already complicated enough to qualify as a disaster, and adding feelings to a disaster is just how you get a catastrophe. I kept working. I kept my head down. I kept copying documents in the archive room at odd hours like the world's most wholesome corporate spy. And then Victor Crane found out. It was a Tuesday, 3 days before Christmas. I was in the break room at 8:40 in the morning, making coffee, when I felt someone come up behind me. Close. I turned around. Victor Crane. Up close, he was bigger than he looked across a ballroom. He had that deliberate physical presence that some men cultivate specifically to make other people feel small. He was smiling. The smile did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "Reed Callahan," he said, like we were old friends, like he'd been looking forward to this. "Mr. Crane," I said. "I wanted to have a word," he said pleasantly. "Man to man, you got a minute?" He didn't wait for an answer. He stepped to the side, a clear invitation to step out of the break room, away from the coffee machine, away from anyone who might walk in. I followed. Because sometimes you follow. Because sometimes the alternative is worse. He walked me to a small alcove near the copy room. Then he turned and looked at me with that same congenial smile. "I hear you've been doing some extra work after hours," he said. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face completely still. I learned that from Anne, actually. Well, she used to say, the first person to show fear in a negotiation loses. "Just routine archive maintenance," I said. "It falls behind during the holiday season." He tilted his head. "That's very dedicated of you." A beat. "I'm going to be direct," he said. The smile didn't move. "Because I'm a direct person and I respect people who understand directness." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card, laid it on the copy room counter beside me. "My people are building an operations consulting team," he said. "Real compensation. We're talking double what you're making here. Benefits, flexibility, the kind of role where a man with family responsibilities could really take care of his family." He let that land. Family responsibilities. He knew about Lily. In return, he continued, "I'd want some operational insights. Nothing dramatic, just awareness. Knowing what's moving through certain departments. Information that would help a major stakeholder make informed decisions." He wanted me to spy on Claire. He wanted me to hand him the very evidence she'd been building, and he was offering me money. And he'd mentioned my family, both of which were, unmistakably, a carrot and a stick in the same hand. I looked at the business card. I picked it up, and I put it in my shirt pocket. "I'll think about it," I said. He smiled fully. "I knew you were a smart man." He walked away. I stood in that alcove for about 30 seconds. Then I walked to the men's room, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the edge of the counter and breathed. I thought about Lily. I thought about what double my salary would mean. About what I could do for her. About the college fund I'd barely started. About the fact that her winter coat was getting too small and I'd been waiting for a sale. And then I thought about the school district in Peoria and the union in Rockford and 214 people whose futures were being quietly stolen. I took the business card out of my pocket. I looked at it for a long moment, and then I tore it in half, and I threw it in the trash. That evening, I called Sandy to check on Lily. Sandy answered on the second ring, but her voice was off, slightly careful. "She's fine, hun," Sandy said. "She's having dinner. But listen, there was a man at your door earlier today." I went still. "What man?" "I didn't know him. He knocked on your door, and when there was no answer, he came and knocked on mine. I asked if you lived there. I said I didn't know the neighbors very well. I wasn't going to tell a stranger anything. He left a card in your mailbox. Long pause. Sandy? I said. Was it a business card? Yes. Thick paper? Navy blue? Yes. Victor Crane had sent someone to my house. He had sent someone to the home where my daughter was. I have never in my life felt fear and fury arrive at exactly the same moment. But I felt it then. I drove to Sandy's, kissed Lily on the head, told her everything was fine, watched her eat her chicken nuggets and talk about horses for 10 minutes until my heartbeat came back down to something resembling normal. Then I texted Claire. One line. He came to my house. I need to see you. Tomorrow. Tell me where. She responded in 4 minutes. Archive room, 7 a.m. I'm sorry, Reed. Those last 3 words. I'm sorry, Reed. Not a CEO to an employee. A person to another person. I stared at them for a long time. 7 in the morning in the archive room smelled like old paper and burnt coffee from the hallway machine 3 floors up. Claire was already there when I arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept. She was in a gray blazer over a dark sweater, and she'd pulled her hair back less carefully than usual, and somehow that made her seem more real than any other version of her I'd encountered. I told her about Victor, about the offer, about Sandy, about the business card in my mailbox. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. He's escalating, she said, because we're close. He can feel it. How close are we? I asked. She took a breath. Not close enough that my contact at the Federal Financial Crimes Unit told me yesterday they have enough to open a formal investigation. What I'm waiting on is one final piece, the authorization signature documentation for the March settlement transfers, the ones I believe he forged. I have those, I said. She looked up sharply. I pulled them Thursday, I said. I was going to leave them in the folder this weekend. A long beat. You have them, she said. Yes. She sat down in one of the archive chairs. Actually sat, which was something I'd never seen her do anywhere that wasn't a formal meeting setting. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Read, she said. If those documents show what I think they show, this is over. He's done. Then let's make sure they show what you think they show, I said. We spent the next 2 hours going through the documents together at a folding table in the archive room, surrounded by bankers' boxes and dead fluorescent light. And they showed exactly what she thought they showed. The March settlement transfers, 3 of them totaling $640,000, bore authorization signatures from the firm's chief compliance officer. Dated on a weekend when the CCO was, according to his own submitted vacation records, in Costa Rica. The signatures had been forged, and the digital access log, the internal system timestamp that recorded who had remotely accessed the document signing portal, showed an IP address registered to a shell company that our federal contact had already flagged in a separate filing. That's it, Claire said. Her voice was even, but her hands were not. That's it, I confirmed. She looked at me across that folding table in a room full of old paper, and something moved across her face that I didn't have words for then, and I'm still not sure I have words for now. It was something between relief and gratitude, and something quieter underneath both of those things. I need to make a call, she said. Make it, I said. She called her federal contact. I stepped out into the hallway to give her privacy. I stood there in the empty early morning corridor of Sutton Capital Group, the building I'd worked in for 3 years without anyone in the executive wing knowing my name. And I felt the particular, strange, electric sensation of being exactly in the right place at the right time, even if I had no idea how I'd gotten here. When Claire came back out, she said, "They want the documents by Friday. They have enough to move by Christmas Eve." "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. "Read." She stopped. like she was choosing something. I know this is not what you signed up for. This job, this company, none of this. A pause. But you didn't have to help me. You could have taken his offer. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about it honestly. The real answer, not the clean one. Because I have a daughter, I said finally, and I want her to grow up in a world where someone stood up when it cost something. Claire looked at me for a long moment, and then she nodded. Once, like she was filing it away somewhere important. And we went back to work. I want to tell you one more thing about those 2 weeks. Because in all the drama of evidence trails and federal auditors and corporate espionage, there was a quiet thing that happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Lily got sick. Not seriously. A winter cold, the kind that every Chicago elementary school child passes around starting in October, like a seasonal tradition. Fever, runny nose, the complete theatrical misery that a 7-year-old brings to a common cold that would make professional actors take notes. I had to leave work early. I texted Dale to cover my afternoon. I picked Lily up from school and brought her home and set her up on the couch with Captain in a blanket and a rotation of terrible kids' television that I have no remaining brain cells to spare on. At around 6 in the evening, my phone buzzed. An internal message through the work system from Claire's account. Formatted like a routine request. Operational update requested. Facility status for Archive Room 14F. Please confirm available hours for weekend access and whether adjacent HVAC has been serviced, which meant I need the documents. Can you get to the archive room this weekend? Is it safe? I started to type a response, and then Lily coughed, this small, wretched, entirely overdramatic cough, and said, "Daddy Reed, I think I'm dying." I looked at my phone. I looked at her. I typed back, "Archive room HVAC under review. Weekend timeline will need to shift to early next week. Apologies for delay." Which meant I can't get there this weekend. My daughter is sick. I'll get it next week. About 20 minutes later, a knock at my door. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting on the couch with Lily's feet in my lap while she watched something about animated animals with complicated friendship dynamics. But I went to the door. It was Claire, in normal clothes, jeans, a coat, a scarf, standing at my front door holding a paper bag. I stared at her. She looked briefly like a person who had arrived somewhere and was now reconsidering. She cleared her throat. "I looked up your address through the employee directory, which I realize is a pause. I brought soup. I don't know if it's from the place on Halstead. They have a chicken and rice soup that's supposed to be, I don't know, is this completely inappropriate?" I stood in my doorway for a long moment, and then I stepped back. "Come in," I said. Lily looked up from the couch when Claire came into the living room. She assessed her with the full diagnostic capability of a feverish 7-year-old. "Are you from Daddy Reed's work?" she asked. "I am," Claire said. "Do you like horses?" Claire blinked, glanced at me, back at Lily. "I think they're remarkable animals," she said carefully. "I've only ridden once. I wasn't very good." Lily considered this. "That's okay. It takes practice," she sniffled. "I've never ridden one either, but I've read 4 books about them, so I know more than most people." "That's an excellent approach," Claire said. She stayed for 40 minutes. She helped me reheat the soup. She sat in the armchair near the couch and talked with Lily about horse breeds with a seriousness and engagement that Lily found immediately and entirely satisfying. She didn't stay long. She wasn't trying to insert herself. She just came and gave what she could give in the moment and left. But before she did, at the door, she looked at me. Not the CEO look, not even the ally in a complicated situation look, just a look. "She's wonderful," she said quietly. "Anne would be." She stopped, reconsidered. "I just mean, she's wonderful." I nodded, because my throat wasn't quite cooperating. "Get some rest," she said. and she left. That was the moment I stopped pretending I wasn't falling for her. It didn't fix anything. It didn't make anything simpler. But I stopped lying to myself about it. And there's a particular kind of freedom in that, in admitting a true thing, even if only to yourself, even if the timing is terrible and the logistics are complicated and you have no idea how the story ends. You just know something is real, and you let it be real. Victor Crane called an emergency board meeting for December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. He'd been busy. He'd spent the previous week collecting proxy signatures from enough board members to hold a formal leadership review. He'd drafted a resolution, a 27-page document alleging financial mismanagement on Claire's part, vague enough to be defensible, specific enough to be damaging. I found out about it at 9 in the morning when Claire's assistant Beth Harmon forwarded me the meeting agenda as part of the logistics coordination request. Beth didn't know what was in it. She was just doing her job. I read the agenda and felt my chest go cold. The meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Victor's resolution would be presented at 2:30. If it passed, and with 40% of the board already in his pocket, and a resolution on paper that looked on the surface like a legitimate governance concern, it might. Claire could be removed as CEO by 4 p.m. on December 23rd. I texted her immediately. She called me back in under 2 minutes. "I know," she said. "I've known since last night. The federal contact. Is there any way to move the timing? If they don't act before 2, I know," she said again. "I'm working on it." "Claire," I stopped. "Are you scared?" A pause, long enough to be an answer. "Yes," she said, simply, quietly. "Okay," I said. "Me too, but it's going to work." "You don't know that," she said. "No," I admitted. "But I know you've spent 12 years building something for 214 people who are counting on it. And I know you haven't made a single mistake in any of this. And I know those documents are exactly what they need." A pause. "So yeah, it's going to work." Silence on the line. "Read," she said. "Yeah, thank you." That was all. She hung up, and I went and pressed Lily's school photo against my palm for about 10 seconds. It lives in my wallet, worn at the corners. And then I went to go coordinate a conference room setup like the most competent facilities manager in the history of the world, because that's what I could do. That's the lane I had. And sometimes you fight with the tools you have. The board meeting convened at 2:15. I was not in that meeting. I was not anywhere near it. I was at my desk running logistics for a vendor contract review that I could not have cared less about in that moment, watching the clock. 2:30 came and went. 3 o'clock. 3:15. At 3:22, I know the exact time because I looked at my phone. My desk phone rang. It was Beth Harmon. "Read." Her voice was strange, tight, almost shaking. You need to come up to the executive floor." "What happened?" I said. "Just come up, please." I went up. The executive floor was quiet, unnerving quiet. A few people were standing in the hallway outside the main boardroom with the expressions of people who have just witnessed something they're still processing. The boardroom door was open. Inside, I could see board members in their seats, several of them talking quietly and urgently. I could see a woman I didn't recognize near the head of the table in a dark blazer. She had a federal badge clipped to her jacket. There was a man beside her I also didn't recognize, also badged. Victor Crane was still in the room, but he was no longer seated. He was standing, very still, with a look on his face that I can only describe as the look of a man who has just discovered, in real time, that the floor beneath him is not as solid as he believed. 2 more agents came through the door from the hallway. One of them said something to Victor in a low, professional voice. And Victor, slowly, incredibly, like the air was leaving him, sat back down. Claire was standing at the front of the room, completely still, completely composed, but when she saw me in the doorway, she held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds, and she nodded. Just once. but it was the kind of nod that meant everything. Victor Crane was escorted from the Sutton Capitol building at 3:48 in the afternoon on December 23rd. His legal team was already on their phones before he reached the lobby. The federal investigation into financial fraud, embezzlement from client pension accounts, and securities document forgery was formally opened by the end of the business day. The board, those who remained, convened a brief session at 4:30 to formally affirm Claire's leadership. It wasn't close. I sat at my desk until everyone else had gone home. Then I drove to Sandy's house. I picked up Lily. She was wearing a Santa hat and a dried macaroni glitter glued to her forearms from some craft project that had clearly exceeded everyone's expectations. She held her arms out to me and I picked her up, and she smelled like glue and Christmas cookies and her. And I just held her. For a long moment, while Sandy smiled at me from the doorway in a knowing way that told me she had absolutely noticed I looked like I'd been through something. "You okay, Daddy Reed?" Lily asked against my shoulder. "Yeah, bug," I said. "Did you bring a chocolate thing with layers?" I had completely forgotten. "I'll make it up to you." "That's not good enough and you know it," she said. She was right, but I was smiling anyway. 3 days after the board meeting, on Christmas evening, my phone buzzed. I was in the kitchen. Lily was asleep. She'd been up since 6 in the morning and had exhausted herself thoroughly by 7 in the evening. And Captain the Stuffed Elephant was tucked under her arm, and her breathing was that particular deep, settled breathing of a child who has had a genuinely good day. I looked at my phone. It was Claire. "Merry Christmas. Is this a strange time to say thank you?" I sat down at the kitchen table. The Christmas tree was on in the corner, a 7-foot Douglas fir that Lily had helped me decorate in a style best described as maximum enthusiasm, minimum coordination. It was glorious. I typed back, "Not strange. Merry Christmas." A moment. "Is she asleep?" I smiled at my phone in the way you smile when something catches you off guard and gets in before the guard goes back up. Out cold, did a full Christmas day at maximum Lily capacity. That sounds like a lot. It was perfect. A pause in the texts. Then, "Can I call you?" "Just for a minute. I won't keep you." I looked at my kitchen, the Christmas tree, the quiet. "Yeah," I typed. "Call me." She called. Her voice was different from the office version, quieter, less armored. She was at her apartment. She'd cooked dinner for herself, she said. Risotto. She'd never made it before, and it had taken 2 attempts, and the first one was genuinely terrible, but the second one had been, she thought, reasonably successful. I told her that was more impressive than most people's Christmases. She laughed. We talked for 43 minutes. Not about the firm, not about Victor, not about evidence or federal auditors or board meetings. We talked about the most ordinary things. Her sister in Portland, Maritu, had sent her a weighted blanket as a Christmas gift with a note that said, "You need rest more than you need anything else." About Lily's opinion on the particular shade of blue of our Christmas ornaments, she had described them as the color of trustworthy. About the coffee maker Claire had owned for 9 years and why exactly she refused to replace it. About Ohio winters versus Chicago winters and how they are essentially the same, but Ohio makes no pretense about it while Chicago has a certain theatrical commitment to its own misery. At some point, I'm not sure exactly when, I realized I was smiling at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea in front of me. And it was almost 10:30 at night, and I had not once looked at my phone to check the time. That hadn't happened since Anne. I don't say that lightly. I say it because it was true and it matters, and grief has a way of making you believe that certain kinds of ordinary happiness have left for good, that you've used up your allocation, that joy of that particular simple variety, sitting somewhere quiet and just talking to someone and not wanting it to stop, belongs to a version of your life that is past. I was wrong about that. I'd been wrong about a few things this December. "Reed," Claire said eventually, Yeah, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, not carefully, not the way you answer things at work. Okay, I said, when this is all resolved, formally, when the investigation is done and the firm is stable, and I am, officially, no longer your CEO in any active crisis capacity. A pause. Would you want to have dinner with me? Not a work dinner, just dinner. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about all the reasons to say no. I thought about complications and professional boundaries, and the fact that she could, technically, still fire me, and that was not an uncomplicated dynamic, no matter how much context you wrapped around it. And then I thought about the archive room at 7 in the morning and the diner on the south side and the window on the 22nd floor and 43 minutes on the phone on Christmas night. Yeah, I said. Yeah? Yeah. Another laugh, softer this time. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We said goodnight. I sat at the kitchen table for another few minutes. Then I went and looked in on Lily. She was still asleep, capped and tucked under her arm. Her hair spread out across the pillow in the spectacular way that kids' hair does when they've had a genuinely good day. I stood in her doorway and watched her breathe. I thought about all the nights I'd stood in this doorway and felt the weight of being alone, the weight of doing this without Anne, the weight of being someone's entire world and not being sure you were enough of a world. And I thought, quietly, carefully, that maybe the weight didn't have to be only mine to carry. Maybe that was allowed. It is now 3 months since that Christmas party at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Let me tell you what has happened since. Victor Crane's legal team filed 4 different motions in January. The federal case moved forward regardless. The forged signature evidence was, apparently, exactly as damning as Claire had believed. As of this month, he is facing charges on 7 counts: securities fraud, document forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and 3 others that I don't fully understand, but that a federal prosecutor described, in a press statement, as serious and extensively documented. He is no longer at Sutton Capital in any capacity. His board proxies have been voided. The 214 client accounts are whole. The school district in Peoria, the union in Rockford, the retirees and the teachers whose futures had been quietly stolen a few $1,000s at a time. Whole. That matters more to me than almost anything else in this story. What else? I was officially promoted in February, Vice President of Operations. Claire made the announcement in an all-staff meeting in the most professionally correct way imaginable, a clean, clear performance review, a salary adjustment that I will not specify because my mother raised me not to discuss money in public, and a handshake in front of the entire firm. She did not acknowledge, in any professional setting, anything beyond the professional, which was right, which was what I would have wanted. But she did stop by my office afterward, the new office, which has a window, which is a level of luxury I had not previously experienced in my professional life, and she set a small coffee cup on my desk, from the coffee place 3 blocks away. She knew my order. I hadn't told her. She just paid attention. "Congratulations, Mr. Callahan," she said. "Thank you, Miss Sutton," I said. And we both kept straight faces for about 4 seconds before something shifted, and she pressed her lips together to hold back what I was fairly certain was a smile. "Dinner Friday?" she said. "Dinner Friday," I confirmed. She walked out of my office. I looked at that coffee cup for a long moment, and I thought, okay, this is allowed. Now, Friday dinner. I need to tell you about Friday dinner. We went to a small Italian place on the north side. Quiet. No one from the firm frequented it. We sat in a corner booth. She'd made the reservation, and she had specifically requested a corner booth, which I found both strategic and very on-brand. We had pasta and a bottle of wine and bread that was so good it should probably be a separate course. and we talked. For 3 hours. Not about work, about everything except work. About her grandfather, and the Sunday mornings he used to take her to the office as a child and teach her how to read a balance sheet like it was a story. About the summer I was 15 and convinced my dad to let me rebuild a truck engine with him, and then we nearly broke it more thoroughly than it had been broken to start with. About Lily's obsession with horses and whether a city apartment could theoretically accommodate a pony. About grief, briefly and honestly, because it doesn't disappear just because you're having a nice dinner. It just becomes something you can hold more gently. At the end of the night, we stood outside the restaurant in the March air, still cold, Chicago insisting on one last month of winter before conceding to spring. "This was good," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It was." "Read." She looked at me with that direct, unguarded look she had, the one I'd first seen at the party and had been thinking about ever since. I don't do this easily. I want you to know that. None of this is easy for me. I'm not a person who trusts quickly." "I know," I said. "But I trusted you," she said. "In a parking garage on Christmas night with essentially no information and no reason to," and she paused. "That was the first time I'd done that in a very long time." "I know," I said again, more quietly. "I just wanted to say that out loud," she said, "because I think things that matter should be said out loud." The wind came off the lake. She pulled her coat tighter, and I reached out, carefully, slowly, and tucked the collar up against the wind. She looked up at me. Long pause. "Dinner again sometime?" I said. "Yes," she said. "Definitely yes." I told Lily about Claire on a Saturday morning, strawberry pancakes, her suggestion, my execution. She rated them an 8 out of 10, docked 2 points because I'd let one of them get slightly too brown on the edge, which she described as a tragedy and also preventable. I told her there was someone I'd been spending time with, someone from work, I said, someone who was very smart and a little serious but also funny when she thought you weren't paying attention. Lily ate a bite of pancake, considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old considering something that matters. "Does she like horses?" Lily asked. "I'll ask her," I said. "Is she nice, Daddy Reed?" As I thought about a diner on the south side, at 1 a.m. and a window on the 22nd floor and a woman who stood up for 214 people when it would have been so much easier to look away. "Yeah, bug," I said. "She really is." Lily nodded, ate another bite of pancake. "Okay," she said, like it was settled, like she'd evaluated all relevant information and reached a satisfactory conclusion. "Okay," I said. "Here's what I know now that I didn't know on the night of that Christmas party. I know that desperation doesn't always look like falling apart. Sometimes it looks like standing perfectly still in a burgundy dress in a crowded ballroom with a champagne glass you haven't touched, holding yourself together with everything you have, because falling apart is not an option you can afford. I know that trust, real trust, the kind that costs something, is one of the rarest things one person can offer another, and that when someone offers it to you in a moment of genuine need, the only right thing to do is hold it carefully. I know that grief does not disqualify you from happiness. I needed someone to demonstrate that for me, and I'm grateful it happened. I know that the archive room on the 14th floor of a downtown Chicago office building smells like old carpet and possibility if you're there for the right reason. And I know that sometimes the moment that changes everything looks absolutely nothing like what you'd expect. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't come with a clear subject line. It comes at the end of a long night in a quiet voice, in a phrase that makes no sense until it makes all the sense in the world. "Take me home, or you're fired." She wasn't asking for a driver that night. She was asking for someone who would stay. Turns out, I was always going to be that person. I just didn't know it yet. If you made it this far, thank you, truly. You spent hours with Reed and Claire and Lily, and I hope some part of it felt real. Because the best stories aren't the ones about perfect people. They're about ordinary people. people with old coffee makers and strawberry pancake traditions and small offices with no windows, who find themselves in extraordinary moments and choose, anyway, to do the right thing. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, share it with someone who needs a good story today. Leave a comment telling me which moment got you. And if you're new here, welcome to Crest Stories. This is what we do. We tell the stories that remind you that people are still, quietly, beautifully worth believing in. I'll see you in the next one.